Hello everybody. Today we are going to discuss the refugee resettlement industry. I was moping around kicking myself after a social justice warrior called me a racist for being wary of refugees, and then it hit me. There's probably a huge scam going on that is leveraging the fanaticism of SJWs to beat dissenters into submission using a false moral high ground. And what do you know? I was right. So, let's get into the details. In 1995, the United Nations formed the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, also known as the United Nations Refugee Agency. This committee is responsible for selecting refugees to be resettled in first world nations. With a budget of almost $8 billion per year and more than $3 billion in actual expenditures, the UNHCR is a behemoth program that manages refugees around the globe. My examination will focus on this agency's interaction with the United States Refugee Program. This table shows the DHS totals for refugees admitted into the United States for 2011 through 2013. In 2011, 141,660 refugees were resettled. In 2012, 144,227, and in 2013, 155,671. With the migrant crisis in Europe and more instability in the Middle East, these numbers have only grown since 2013. The UNHCR works in coordination with the United States State Department to place refugees across the United States. The State Department, likewise, works with 9 official refugee resettlement contractors, known as VOLOGs, volunteer agencies. The following are a list of the 9 main approved VOLOGs in the United States. There are 350 federal subcontractors in 190 cities, all of which are affiliated with these 9 agencies, but for the sake of illustrating this business model, we shall focus on these 9. The Church World Service, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the International Rescue Committee, World Relief Incorporated, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, the Episcopal Migration Ministries, and the Ethiopian Development Council. According to the State Department's website, these organizations are each paid a fee of $2,025 per refugee, purely for handling that individual case. Additionally, these VOLOGs can utilize the U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement's Matching Grants Program, which is an award of $2 for every $1 raised by an agency. The grant allows for non-per capita appropriation of the funds from these grants and states that this allows grantees the flexibility to maximize the program's impact across their respective networks by passing through an appropriate per capita amount based on such factors as the local cost of living, lack of RMP, family support, and other factors, and thus permitting local matching grant program service providers to individually tailor services higher or lower than the per capita rate as necessary for each client to achieve self-sufficiency. In other words, the VOLOGs can spend that money as they choose so long as they can demonstrate that there is a need for non-per capita appropriation of their funding. This table shows the total revenues of the 9 official VOLOGs that I mentioned before. As you can see, all 9 of these VOLOGs, besides the Episcopal Migration Ministries, have more than 50% of their revenues coming from government grants. From 2008 to 2015, more than $4 billion has been poured into these 9 VOLOGs. These number totals do not even include the subsidies and bonuses granted to companies and organizations that hire or tap into the Refugee Resettlement Program networks. In the following video, you will hear Bob Carey, Director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, frame the refugee program as a moral obligation for the U.S. taxpayer.
It comes to you with the people.
And fortunately, they don't come to me or my office, but the U.S. program is fairly complex, so I'll try to give the quick version and direct people to a couple of websites that can give you the intimate detail or suggest that they watch John Oliver on YouTube.
Yeah, it's
Which
fun to watch all the little badges of the government
Right.
agencies float by.
And I have to
as,
say that is one of the most succinct and accurate assessments that I've seen of the vetting process. So if you want a lighter version of it, I recommend John Oliver or the State Department website or the ORO website if you don't like John Oliver. But the vetting process after UNHCR's vetting process has been concluded, which, as Alex has referenced, is itself rigorous. The U.S. State Department administers the program, and refugees are referred to the State Department program overseas by UNHCR. They then go through the most rigorous screening process, both by State Department contractors and then by the Department of Homeland Security has specially trained cadres of staff members who are knowledgeable about country conditions. After they are vetted through those processes, there are at least 8 different databases that name biometric checks, face-to-face interviews of every individual who's coming to the U.S. So I could go on at incredible length, but as Alex has said, it is the most rigorous vetting program for any individuals who enter this country. And that's just the U.S. part of it. So once the very few who are admitted have been thoroughly screened and are determined under U.S. law to have a well-founded fear of persecution such that they cannot return to their country. And I think it's important to remember these are individuals who do not have options. They can't go back to their country of origin. They don't have legal status where they are. Resettlement is not an economically driven or a choice that's made because they want a better life. It's because they have been forced to flee their homes against their will, because often, as we've discussed today, they fear for the lives and the safety of their children, and they want to create a better life or really ensure the survival of their children and their family members. And the U.S. program has traditionally offered a life-saving opportunity for people to rebuild their lives, and that is part of the DNA of this country, and I think one of our proudest parts of our heritage is that we have been a country that has been founded on the principles of providing protection to people and an opportunity to people who are fleeing persecution. With regard to the office, that it's a considered status, but it allows people the opportunity to move towards permanent residence and ultimately citizenship. So it's
That's pretty good. Now,
Using terms like part of our DNA and one of our proudest traditions are fine, but they do not make an argument as to why such a massive amount of money should be poured into this industry. Responding to the next question, Bob says the following about the refugee admittance cap and why it should be raised.
I'm new to this panel.
I think a lot of people wonder who decides who comes in. President Obama got to say, hey, we're going to have 10,000 Syrian refugees in the next year. That's our number. This is our thing. Is that what happens? The president sits down and says, we're going to take some Congolese this year. We're going to take the Burmese this year.
That's a bit of it, but it's more complicated than that. It being the U.S. government and government generally, there is an annual consultation process between the administration and the government, and that the president, that is required under the law, that there be consultation between the leadership of our Congress, and that does take place. It took place this year, but it is consultation. It's not an approval and vetting process. Ultimately, it is the president who determines what the refugee admissions ceiling will be. That is an executive decision, and that decision is usually made at the beginning of the federal fiscal year on or around October 1st. So that is what happened this year, where the president consulted with Congress, and the administration decided that given the emergent refugee needs, that the ceiling should be increased to 85,000 this year.
The refugee admittance cap that Bob mentioned is a reference to the United States Refugee Act of 1980. This act is an amendment to the earlier Immigration and Nationality Act and the Migration and Refugee Assistance Act, and was created to provide a permanent and systematic procedure for the admission of the United States of refugees of special humanitarian concern to the United States. This act codified an amount of refugees that will be taken in yearly, and the cap has been continually raised. Now, Bob mentioned that the process is very complex, and it might be tough for our tiny simian brains to understand, so I've put together a diagram of the business model of this industry. The UNHCR select refugees and asylees to be distributed to various nations. In the United States, the State Department works with the UNHCR to assign the refugees to vologs, non-government organizations that receive a portion of their money from the State Department itself and a portion from private donors. Some of this money is redirected back into the lobbyists and special interest groups that push for policy in Washington, D.C. Some is dedicated to the actual services of resettling the refugees, which is not a minor expense, and the rest is overhead. Through this funnel, hundreds of millions of dollars per year is flowing from the State Department to the vologs, using refugees as a conduit. The Refugee Resettlement Program is a business, and it's a huge business. This is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry, much of which is funded by taxpayers and masked in a veneer of moral imperative. By exploiting the better natures of people who are paying for this, the leaders of these vologs and the politicians that push for expansion of the refugee program are driving a lucrative industry by which they pay off themselves and their friends and political allies. Next time Hillary Clinton talks about expanding the refugee program, she should probably be held to account for why the Clinton Global Initiative and their sub-volog Upglow received thousands of dollars from the State Department while she was Secretary of State for the resettlement of refugees, and whether or not that has anything to do with her position on it now. It's no wonder that the refugee industry and those benefiting from it are fiercely trying to protect the pipeline. For that reason, it's a little discussed fact that for every one refugee that's brought over to the United States, 12 could be settled safely in the Middle East. If we want to help these people, and we should, we would be much better served by a program that would seek to accomplish it in that manner, not an industry of organizations that thrive off of the taxpayers' desire to help their fellow human beings.